Right now, it's time to welcome our Detroit Bureau Chief and writer of Truck Tech, Alan Adler, to the show. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
We're doing great. New Mexico State won last night, so both of us are pretty happy. Is your bracket still intact, or did Kentucky get you?
Oh, no. Oh, my bracket. Look, I spent 2 or 3 hours last night watching NC2A wrestling, which is my favorite anyway. ESPN's giving us 7 hours a day. I'm going to the national semifinals tonight because they're here in Detroit. I'm excited. This sport, I'll never tell the story on here, but this sport basically got me my start in journalism. So I'm excited for tonight.
Very exciting stuff there.
All right, guys.
Alan, let's dig right into Truck Tech this morning. Autonomous Dashboard Edition, which is an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah, the folks at KeyBanc in Cleveland put out a dashboard this week, which was kind of interesting. They went into the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration data and sort of dug out, kind of who's doing what so far in terms of the trucks, the number of drivers or safety drivers, and miles traveled, things like that. Now, it's interesting because most of their numbers, while I think give a good indication of what's going on, are not really up to date because as we talk to these companies, we learn that they have, more trucks, maybe, more drivers, honestly, or more supervisors, I would call them, rather than drivers, because they put these drivers in the seats, but they're not expected to drive. They're expected to monitor the system, and then sometimes they have engineers with them. Anyway, it was an interesting exercise, I thought, that they did. But I mean, even yesterday, some of the numbers in the database that they used are from 2020. So when you look at things like yesterday, we listened in on Embark Truck's call, and they're at 1 million miles traveled. Too Simple is closer to 7 million now. So some of the numbers in there are pretty low. But I think it's interesting that we have enough now to start looking at this stuff and saying, what's really going on out there? One of the encouraging things, and this is something that all the companies like to point to, is that when they do get inspected, they're not finding any safety violations, and there haven't been any incidents, which is really good. I mean, this is an area that everybody is concerned about when we get to the point of the robots driving the trucks. Is how safe are they? Well, a lot of the early data suggests they're very safe, much safer than human drivers. But I think everybody's watching this one area to say, what's going to happen. So, nothing yet, which is really good. So that was interesting, I thought. I think it's also a couple autonomous notes today or segments in the newsletter. The other, Alex Rodriguez, who's probably one of my favorite guys out there because he's a young guy. He's super enthusiastic. He's the co-founder of Embark Trucks. He decided this week that we wrote about Alex. Last year we wrote about how his background really came out of FIRST Robotics, and the young, school age first Lego League and that sort of thing. School age young kids working on robotic projects. He decided this week, that he's going to donate his entire 2022 salary. We don't know exactly how much that is yet, by the way. For a new program that he's starting called Little Robotics. And the first donation that they made was to a girls' robotics team from Afghanistan, which has gotten a lot of attention apart from here. But, it's really nice to see something like that. He made $180,000 in 2021. So that gives you some indication of the kind of money we're talking about. And of course, as the largest shareholder in Embark Trucks, most of his wealth is through the controlling interest of the company. But a really cool story, I thought, and one that he calls it paying it forward, and I would agree with that. So kind of a neat little story there.
Alan, I love that piece of the story because I'm a product of these women in STEM, young girls in STEM investment programs, and that kind of got me, my interest in science and learning tinkering with robotics when I was like 7 or 8 years old, just in elementary school, And these programs are something that I think there's a ton of opportunity in the industry to do, especially moving forward. And so his decision to make this happen, can you talk a little bit about, did he give it like kind of an indication of like what drove him to do this?
Well, I haven't talked to him about this particular activity, Kaylee, but when we talked back, you see, I have a son who went through robotics as well. He was in First Lego League. It was actually a national champion on a national championship team the same year that Alex was down in St. Louis. It was around 2013. It was one of those funny stories that we sort of recognized at the moment that they were on different fields. When you get to the national or the world championships, you have different fields named for famous scientists like Curry and things like that. Anyway, it turns out that we had a connection there, and so we talked quite a bit about FIRST Robotics back when I met with him out in California last year, and so I wasn't surprised to see this, but it's very cool when you put your own your own money into something like that, and it's just really neat to see him doing it. I mean, this guy's 26 years old. He is not that far removed from his robotic experience in like FIRST and things like that. He formed his own team, and as I said, he was a national world champion on one of the fields. So, really, I think a connection that endures with him. I mean, the first autonomous vehicle that he and his co-founder built was a golf cart. I think they called it Maurice, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look that up, but I have no idea why, and he doesn't remember. But anyway, I've seen Maurice, and it was an autonomous golf cart. So this goes way back with him, so it's not surprising to see him do it. And as you said, being somebody who benefited from STEM activities and things like that, and girls robotics teams, so forth. You ended up being a meteorologist, so clearly your science background, played in there. I think it's great, and I think it's really exciting for him.
It's really a great story there, Alan. Keeping on the trend, of course, on this autonomous vehicles, can you talk to some of the overlap that seems to be happening with autonomous cars and trucks and the field of vision cameras right now?
Yeah, that's our third item on autonomy this week. And it's something that, we've talked about it before. We've had longer stories on it. But this idea that the companies that do both ride-hailing robotic cars and that would be Waymo and Aurora Innovation are the two. They both have made a big point out of saying that there's a lot of technology transfer that really helps advance the craft or the science, if you will, of autonomy by being able to take what you learn in the one place and transfer it to the other. And in the case of Aurora this week, this story really tells itself through a couple of pictures that we used in the newsletter. But really, this idea of these sensors and the array and the vision or the view that they're getting almost identical, except for the placement of where their sensors are. But they're finding real value and obviously, a better investment case if you're going to do cars and trucks to be able to use the same, the same sensors and the same systems. And so Waymo mentioned that, has talked about that, and they're doing that with the trucks. Waymo uses, right now they're equipping Freightliners, which we wrote about a couple of weeks ago here in Detroit with their system. And they also have a Jaguar I-Paces that they're using for ride hailing. And they're both getting the 5th generation of software software and hardware, I should say, that Waymo's using. And then at Aurora, you've got Toyota Sienna minivans, and you've got Peterbilt Model 579s, and eventually you'll have Volvo VNLs getting all the same equipment. So the sharing of this is great. These guys, of course, are not pure truck makers. They started in cars and then it extended to trucks. The other companies that we write about most often are pure play truck guys like Embark, which is the oldest of the group. And then, Too Simple is focused simply specifically on trucks, as is Torque Robotics, owned by Daimler, and then Kodiak Robotics as well. So, and Plus, we don't talk much about Plus anymore, but they're focused on trucks exclusively.
Alan, really quickly, you mentioned Too Simple. Before we let you go, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but they're looking potentially for a buyer for Too Simple Holdings out in China, correct?
Yes, they are. And it's interesting, too, because, their stock has been hammered the last few weeks. Ever since they made this kind of sudden, maybe artless transition of CEOs. They brought back the founder, Xiao Hao, as the CEO and the chairman. And more or less, he'll be around, but I don't expect him to fulfill an entire contract in Chung Lu, who is very well thought of. And Chung Lu was one of these guys that answered your questions. He certainly answered media questions, but he was also, I think, a favorite of the analyst community because he really was transparent to the extent that he could be about the company. So that was a catalyst for a big drop in the stock. It started to come back the last few days since they announced the idea of maybe spinning off their operations, or selling off, I should say, their operations in China, which is more of a deep water port and drayage kind of thing than it is highway work. Highways are, much more regulated in China than they are here.
Very interesting, and definitely something that we're going to watch going forward. Alan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll catch up with you again on Tuesday of next week. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much. Good luck on your bracket.
Oh, thank you. I'm doing good. That Kentucky loss really put me in a sweet spot.